Alright, it's been a long time since I posted a new video to my YouTube channel, around 2 months. It's day 191 of this growing a mango seedling in a tube series. You can still see the differences in coloration between the different segments, between the nodes going all the way up to the fourth set of leaves. They get redder as you go up, which means they're newer. And unfortunately, it looks like there are several burn spots that just materialized out of nowhere on the fourth set of leaves. It's possible that there's still imidacloprid defending this plant and that the burn spots are caused by bugs that are parasitizing the leaves and then dying off as they get poisoned by the imidacloprid. Other than that, I don't really have a good explanation. If I don't water or wash or spray the leaves every once in a while, then they do accumulate bug corpses of various kinds. Some stuff that I've never even seen before or can't really identify because they're so small. So that's a pretty big bruise right there. And these spots, yeah, they're very unaesthetic, but I'm kind of interested to see what's causing them. Still haven't figured it out. It's day 192. I've decided to start using chemical fertilizer again after a long period of going organic. Even if having organic detritus on top and watering from the top down was doing something, it was either doing something too slow or it's just not doing enough, in my opinion. So I think if I dilute this into the proper concentration in water for outdoor use, it should provide a big boost. I think there's something to be said about trying to give this series a kickstart. It's been a relatively long period of time. I know the weather's been cold, in which the seedling's not really doing anything. The fourth set of leaves is there, and I guess mature, but the fifth set of leaves seems to be on its way. It's just not really developing at the rate at which everything developed before, which is kind of worrisome. And as I've iterated before, it's a complete pain to water this tube from the top. Absorption is very slow. I'm thinking that the clay soil from the neighborhood is very high in clay, and hence even a 50% sand and 50% clay soil mixture could still be very high in clay content and preclude permeability. So it's day 213. I've decided to give up on this organic detritus method, and part of it is also because there's just not enough volume on the top between the top of the soil sand mixture and the top of the tube to hold much stuff in there anyway. And as you can see, every time I water, I have to wait for all this bubbling and wait for it to kind of trickle down the edge of the cylinder. It just takes forever, and that algae or mold or moss or whatever that is, it's completely taken over the tube. It looks pretty nasty at this point. It's kind of like the top of a freshwater pond just infested with pond scum. So it's day 228. The moss growing on the inner side of the tube is completely connected. It's just a cylindrical sheet at this point. And this is after I washed off the leaves just for aesthetic reasons. You can still see some little webbing stuck on there and dust and whatever. So as you can see, the base of the stem is nice and fat. It's not as thick as any of my fingers, but it keeps getting thicker. That's promising. The shoot apical meristem seems fine. The fifth set of leaves seems to be on its way, although there are webbings around, even though I just washed. That won't go away easily. It's day 239. I'm showing you a 12 pack of Rubbermaid soft waste baskets I got off Amazon. Prorated, they're about $3 each. They'll serve me well, not only as trash cans indoors, but as planters. So I conceptualized this idea while I was browsing on Amazon as to what could I use to make my own planters for cheap. I'm going to stack 2 of these to make each planter because these are very soft waste baskets. They're very pleasant to touch, and they won't scrape you if you accidentally rub your shins against them or calves, which is great. But I think just one alone with heavy sand and soil in there might not be good enough because the shape can warp. So I'm just going to stack two together after I drill some holes and remove these super annoying stickers, labels that leave this horrible sticky residue. So if you try oil to wipe away these labels or sticker residue and that doesn't work, in which this case it didn't, then that means the glue is not oil based, and you can always use this trick, which is packaging tape. On day 247 I'm doing more prep work. I'm taking the largest drill bit in my set and I'm drilling away 4 holes about 1.5 inches, which is 3.5 to 4 centimeters at the bottom corners. And this will basically serve as the outer trash can stacked within underneath a second trash can that has smaller holes right at the bottom, 8 small holes drilled instead of 4 big ones. And the reason the one on the left, the outer one, has holes much higher up is because I want it to serve as a watering tray. So the plants that I'm transplanting are all pretty well developed, and I don't want water to just start running onto the balcony floor the moment the drainage falls through. So I made the holes go a little higher. So it's day 248. I did 3 big transplant jobs on this day, and it's time to cash in on all that prep work. So the other 2 plants I'm doing the transplants for are my pomegranate grown from seed and that giant Bangkok guava that you just saw. So not much change here. It seems like there's been a little bit more development, but it's been so long. If it didn't do this, I'd be surprised. But nonetheless, I'm taking that risk. So the first thing that crossed my mind was to use rubber-coated mallet. I'm not sure if that's rubber actually, it's just a plastic, and it's filled with sand. So this tube is surprisingly flexible and tough. The avocado one that I had, when I was throwing it away, I just sort of hit it on the edge of the sidewalk near the dumpster and it just exploded. It cracked open. So I thought this would be really easy to crack. So the mallet did nothing, deadfall hammer did nothing, and the pliers, glorified pliers, didn't do anything either. So I'm removing the tape and I'm going to see if I can push it out from the bottom, this entire cylindrical mass, roots and all, of dirt and sand. And as you can see, I'm straining right now and it's not even moving. So that's 3 failed ideas. Then I went to the kitchen, got an old knife. This one is actually serrated on its edge, which makes it ideal for sawing. I do have a power saw, but I didn't want to create any kind of additional risks or make a huge mess. I didn't want like chunks of plastic flying into my face or whatever. So I decided not to do that. I fast forwarded through a lot of the work, but basically using these lever pliers, I'm getting a pretty good leverage to crack open the plastic. So it's working. It's a pretty rough and tumble barbaric method, but I probably won't ever be doing this again, so I didn't really want to break out the power saw, create a big mess. I have to clean the power saw afterwards and do all this extra stuff. So I know that was a high risk move, but my logic here is I'm not going to keep most of the root anyway, because this trash can is about a foot deep. So if you count for an inch of space from the dirt line to the top of the rim on the inside, yeah, that's really 11 inches at best for the taproot. So the problem here is I have a 3-foot deep taproot, and I'm pretty sure the rest of the taproot goes all the way to the bottom. And as you can see from this green stuff on the sides, I think it's pretty much settled that this is a cylindrical sheet of moss. It's not algae or mold. Mold is pretty much microscopic, and algae is basically the same way. I think algae can have a little bit more structure than mold, but yeah, those are basically like colonies of single-celled organisms. Moss, you could see right there, we had little structures, yeah. So it's pretty fibrous. So I'm pretty sure that's a species of moss. If I'm wrong, feel free to correct me. I'm measuring with a wastebasket to determine how much of the taproot I can keep. So this job was real bare here. You can see that I had it's not really a gas mask, although it can be. It's just like an old mask I have that has these very fine particulate filters. And I'm not really wearing it for what I'm doing right now. I'm actually wearing it because after this I had to do all this mixing of sand and clay soil that's been filtered through a strainer. So it's got no pebbles in it. It's from the neighboring hills. And that has very fine particulates. Like I said earlier in this episode, the clay content is very high. So it just gets airborne. And clay particles have electrostatic properties that enable them to fly like dust and get all over everything and attach to stuff and stain everything. So they can be discs that are as thin as 8 molecules, I've heard. And I'm wondering how many lateral roots I'm ripping off right here. Probably quite a few. So the rest of the column can't all be dirt. So you can see the taproot was growing on the side, and yeah, it's just sheets and sheets of moss. Interesting to look at, but I'm wondering what the net effect of all this moss was. Was it actually generating some oxygen because it's photosynthesizing, or was it using net more oxygen and hence suffocating the roots? So I don't know. So like I was saying with the clay, if you don't wear a protective mask and you do a lot of work with it, later on when you get in the shower and clean up, you'll find you're hacking up phlegm that has clay in it for quite a while. So that's pretty nasty. I'm going to avoid that, breathing in all those clay particles and all the pathogens that could be in there and whatnot. Even if there aren't any, it's still pretty gross. So I think that should be the final cut. There's no other easy way that I see to get off these cylinders of plastic and dirt. And I'm digging out the remainder of this, so I shouldn't have to do any more cutting. Should be the end of the job. So the 50% sand, 50% clay mixture, clay soil that is very dry in there. It always looked wet for the last few weeks just due to the sheet of moss. So before the moss grew, I had a very good gauge visually as to how wet the inside of the column was. But after the moss grew like that, I just had no way to tell. So this thing was underwatered for the last few weeks. And I'm thinking that's probably why the fifth set of leaves is stalled out. And I took the risk to do this transplant. So it is a pretty big risk, as you can see, but I think it'll pay off. It seems like some plants can start to recover from a transplant rather quickly, but I'm not sure if this is the case because it was already kind of dehydrated before the transplant. So let's see what's in that final cylindrical mass there. It seems to be stuck. And after I did a little bit of pulling, after I excavated everything within the cylinder manually, you can see the remains of the endosperm still fused together. It's time to do a post-mortem and see what's going on. So that's the seed coat, completely useless and always there, and doesn't seem to rot away. And here are the two halves of the endosperm. They still look somewhat fresh, furthest away from where they were attached to the plant, the embryo. And it seems like these things never get used up. In all my mango growing attempts, they just sort of shrivel up at the connections where they're attached. So that stuff is dead weight. And it's also living tissue for quite a while, so it never seems to rot away either. Unless you're talking about an environment full of potting mix where I keep watering until everything just turns into fungus gnat larvae. So as you can see, this taproot just goes on for days, and that's how I designed this series, thinking that a tube that was 3 feet deep would enable it to go deep, and it did very quickly, and hence get a good start. So I'm not sure as to whether that's necessary, but I think this plant is well enough established to the point where I can take these risks. So I'm just going to make a cut here to the bottom of the inner can. And as you can see, the root looks very healthy on the inside, but I'm very worried nonetheless because I just cut away the bottom 70% of the root system by length. So after this transplant, it can't grow any more vertically. It's just this old growth that has to develop laterally to help anchor the plant and expand within the mass of soil and sand with its lateral roots, which will no doubt get thick over time if this plant survives this transplant. What I don't show in this video is a tremendous amount of prep work that went into prepping this new potting mixture. And the first thing that I had to do was to go out there, dig up some of the local clay soil, filter it through a strainer, then haul it back to my apartment balcony. Then I had to go haul bags of sand that I got from Lowe's, 50-pound bags for under $7. Then I had to mix that together. I also had to cut the bags of sand open and let them air out and dry out because bags of sand always come wet for whatever reason. And they're also very leak prone too. So water gets in, sand spills out. You have to pick a bag that's not leaking. So all of this was a ton of work, but I'm sure it'll pay off over the coming weeks and months. And I'm very confident that this mango growing series will continue. I'll have to name it something different. I'll probably just call it growing a mango tree from a seed after this transplant. So you'll see the series name and the episodes change, but it's still the same content. It'll still be in the same playlist, and I know it's drifting in and out right now, the focus, but what I'm trying to show you is that this drains way faster than the 50% sand, 50% clay soil mix that I had before. When that stuff was dry, a cloud of fine clay particles would just fly up when I watered, and then it would take a very long time for the water to interact with the clay particles and get in there. So it's December 1. Plants on my balcony barely get any direct sunlight in the mornings, and there's been a lot of cloudy and rainy days. So that further reduces the amount of sunlight, and it's cold. So these are actually great conditions. This is great timing for the 3 transplants that I'm doing on this day, because after you transplant something, or let's say you take a cutting from a mature plant, you don't want it to try to establish its root system when it's super hot and dry, like around summer. That would be the worst time, I think, to do a transplant. At least you'd have to move them into the shade and give plenty of water. So thanks for watching, and wish me luck over the next few weeks.